You might have heard of that saying, very famous quote that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you can do a bunch of different things to create great strategy. But unless you've got the culture to be able to do that, it doesn't always work. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Passion Institute podcast. I'm Shivani Gupta, I'm your host. I'm going to dive into this conversation that we've been having since COVID about face-to-face versus virtual, but specifically, we're going to talk about training today. And I thought that I might use one of the programs that we use, which is getting your people to step up, as an example of that, but you could apply this to absolutely anything. Why do we want to still continue to train? And what that means, and the benefits of face-to-face versus virtual as well. So firstly, if I just take it into the concept of that, any training that we're doing in our businesses, one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the concept of why we're doing this training. And what does that mean? So for example, in getting your people to step up, it's really about getting our people, our managers, to know how to coach our people. But in the end, what we want is our people to take more ownership, more accountability. We want them to be more proactive when it comes to solving problems, so that it's not always left up to the manager or the executive or the CEO or the entrepreneur. And so I wrote a book on this last year called Getting Your People to Step Up with Wiley. The book's been doing really well, both in Australia and overseas. And on a side note, if you want to have a look at it, check out our website, passioninstitute.global, or have a look on Amazon for that particular title as well. But essentially, why do we send people for training in the first place? Well, we want to make sure that we are investing in our people's growth. So one of the things that we do is that we want people to constantly be upskilling in a world where we've got AI now, and the AI tools and what's going to be available for us are continuing to exponentially increase. So one of the reasons we want to do it, we want to keep investing in our people. And by leaders, what we can do is really set that example of stepping up ourselves, for example, and then we want to be able to do that. And there's always this cascading or trickling effect that we call in leadership. So we always want our people to be following and cascading some of the behaviors that we as managers and leaders have. And the reason we want to cascade that, and the reason we really want to walk that talk, as we talk about, is we know that it directly influences the team culture and performance. You might have heard of that saying, very famous quote that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you can do a bunch of different things to create great strategy. But unless you've got the culture to be able to do that, it doesn't always work. So now let's talk about, why is face-to-face training more impactful? Look, in some of the really basic training, it is probably a similar amount, but people are also a little bit tired of doing so many things online. And the other thing to remember is that when I use that example of getting your people to step up in the training that we provide, it really is about people. And so we are training your managers to know how to coach some of the other people. So when you're dealing with people, we want that in-person training to build trust. We really want people to be more present, which is a lot easier face-to-face. And it also encourages really great feedback opportunities. And so you're able to facilitate not only the intellectual conversation, but you're also able to facilitate a better emotional connection between the trainer and the participants. So it's not saying that, the point I'm trying to make here is not that every face-to-face training is better, but when it comes to your people learning about people, for example, face-to-face training is usually much better, and it's worth the little bit of extra investment outside of the cost of the training program if you've got to look for some accommodation or flights as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that is so important to tailor the training for managers. See, the thing is that there's not a lot of information for middle managers and senior managers. So we see a lot of people for frontline, and we see a lot of programs available for leaders. But some of these middle managers who've got to manage up, manage across, manage down, there's not as much of that information around. So that middle manager level, that middle of the I'm vegetarian, so rather than say a burger, we always say, well, rather than the beef patty in the middle, the veggie patty in the middle. It's really important that when we're looking at them, they've got some very unique challenges. They've got new approaches that they need. And we've also got to remember that this is the first time our managers are going to be managing up to all 5 generations in the workforce. I've done a previous podcast on this particular topic. So it's really important that when we're asking our people to step up, for example, that we're doing it really effectively. The other thing that's really important when you're looking at training is getting very clear on who your key stakeholders are. So, is it the managers? So, for example, they're getting your people to step up. That's really designed for managers. Or if you're doing other training, is it for the CEOs? Is it for your, head of people and culture directors? So who is it really targeted for? And it's really important to involve those decision makers in the conversation to get their buy-in. So if you're going to send the managers, they're going, oh, great, I've got to do all my work. Now my manager or my executive now also wants me to go to this 2-day training course. So really getting their buy-in and talking about the benefits and how that investment of that time can really help them come out of that. The other is that there are some common challenges that are occurring when we're training our people. People are finding it more difficult to manage people because of all the changes that are happening, either with health, with aging parents, with people having children later on in life. And as I spoke about earlier, all of the different generations. So one of the things we want to do is have a culture of open communication. You want to be able to talk about incentives. You want to be able to retain your key people. I mean, one of the reasons why I wrote this particular book was that a lot of the data was showing is that when you lose key people, it is super expensive. It is way beyond the cost of recruitment and having somebody temporary fill into that role. It's getting somebody up to the same proficiency or level of expertise can take up to 2 to 5 times their salary. That is really, really expensive. So if you've got somebody on $60,000, it can cost you somewhere between 120 to 300K to be able to get that up. So getting people that understand how to manage people is so, so important. The other thing that's really important is to understand when we're sending people for training, are we doing that? What are the benefits that we're going to see? So, for example, in the getting your people to step up training that we do, we talk about the fact that it's all about employee retention, keeping your really good ones. That's your number one priority. And conversations that you've got, and conversations on their satisfaction and their incentives, and how do we actually get to do that? And then how do we manage some of the challenging people rather than always go to the noisy people? So you always want to make a connection between the training and the outcomes that you want to see in terms of the people there. And you also, some organizations say, look, actually, if we're going to train a lot of our people, the CEO or some of the executive also need to be trained in it so they know what the cascading impact of some of that is. Well, yes and no. It really depends if it's relevant and how that's going to be impacting that. We can always share with them how that, by having their people do that, how that impacts their mindset or how they might need to be able to manage some of their people really differently as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, for example, we target, when we do that training, very specifically the people and culture directors, head of them, managers, and also the CEOs and the entrepreneurs that want to get their people to be able to sort of step up. So when you're doing that training, also making sure, how does that fit into some of the existing training that you've already got? How does that fit into, have you got like a training map, for example? So rather than just do this, I'll just send them to this and I'll just send them to this because there's a little gap that needs to happen. It's better to have a training plan and how that training then fits into that. So that's one of the questions that we often ask the people and culture directors, as well as the CEOs and entrepreneurs that we work in. How would this fit in? How would this help your people step up, and how does that link into some of the other things in there as well? So to wrap this up, I want you to just think about, when you are sending your people on training, is to make sure, please do a bit of a skills gap analysis. Very simple, you can have a skills on one side and your people across the other. Work out where your people have the gaps. Make sure that your training is very much designed and tailored. It's not something that you're doing. Make sure that you look at the benefits of doing the in-person trainings. Align your training goals with the company's long-term vision and making sure that this is where you're trying to get to that, and make sure that people are held accountable. So when they've done the training, how can they actually bring some of this information back into the business? How can they impact leadership? How do we keep a hold of the fact that we've, invested in all of that? So I hope you got something out of that with us using that example that we had. If we can help you with any of your training, please let us know. If you're looking at training from others, please make sure you do some of those tips that I shared with you. And if you've got any questions at all, please shout out, and we would be happy to share some of the other research and papers that we've got that might help you make sure that your training dollars goes a long way. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for joining us on the Passion Institute podcast. If today's episode sparked a new idea or inspired you to maybe take some action or helped you see a business in a new light, we would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe. It really helps us present a great show. Leave a review and share this episode with other fellow entrepreneurs and leaders who also are ready to make an impact. Remember, passion is the fuel for greatness, and every step you take brings you closer to your vision. Keep dreaming big, leading with purpose, and making waves in the world. Until next time, stay passionate, stay inspired, and keep building your legacy. This is your host, Shivani, and signing on from the Passion Institute podcast. See you soon.